Sorry, sir.
1:30 in the morning is not the time for apologies, Inspector.
No, sir.
It's explanations I'm after. Why are we in here?
I wanted a word first, sir.
Who is this man?
He calls himself Gourko, sir. Professor Andrei Gourko.
The poet?
I understand that's what he is, sir, yes.
Well, what's this then?
Sir?
Gourko must be 48 or 50. This looks more like a man of 30. Why wasn't he sent straight to the country?
I couldn't say, sir. Except that Mr. Carson wants you to proceed as quickly as possible.
Have you seen Mr. Carson?
No, sir. Major Sullivan has, though.
The Major here now?
Yes, sir. He's with the Professor in your office, sir. Mr. Carson felt you should both...
Inspector, do something for me, will you?
Yes, sir.
Go and ask Major Sullivan if he'd mind joining me in here for a minute.
All right, sir.
And stay in there yourself.
Yes, sir.
What's all this about?
A man called Gourko.
You realise who he is?
Well, I realise what he was.
An internationally established poet?
Poetry was never my line.
And a recognised authority on Russian Western defence.
Well, now, as to that, Gourko's supposed to have been in a mental hospital for the past 2 years for expressing anti-Soviet sentiments.
Which could mean anything at all. Is that why this is out of date?
Somehow or other, he's got himself out of Russia.
And now he's applying for political asylum.
We're instructed to clear him, fast.
So everybody loses a night's sleep.
Speed is of the essence, Major.
When isn't it? Well, how did Gourko get out, then?
He hasn't said.
Soviets are going to be none too pleased.
Well, who can tell?
Well, what have you been talking about?
Nothing.
He speaks English, you know.
Perfectly.
So?
Well, I get the feeling I'm not senior enough to bother with.
Yes, we may have a point, though.
And I shouldn't think commanders are much in his line, either.
If the man wants asylum, he will have to ask for it.
In verse, perhaps.
Cultural gains are not entirely without their value.
Yes, well, I wouldn't know. I'll just pursue a few mundane political inquiries, see if the Soviets know their man's gone yet.
You do that.
You're welcome to this one, if you can stay awake.
I apologise for the lateness of the hour, Professor. I'm afraid your arrival took us all by
I'm not
surprise.
unused to prison insomnia.
Ryan. Commander Ryan.
Yes. I was expecting a Mr. Carson.
And you'll probably meet him tomorrow.
First a major, now a commander. I had not looked for a succession of junior officers.
Shall we make a start, nonetheless?
Start.
At the beginning?
Which is precisely where, Commander?
You are applying for political asylum.
That is so.
Then we'll begin with that, shall we? Why?
Why am I seeking asylum? Because I am an optimist.
Yes, that may not be quite enough of an answer.
For Her Majesty's government, perhaps not. It is nevertheless all I have to say until someone who represents your government at a responsible level...
I'm afraid you're going to have to put up with me, Professor.
During the past 30 years, I've spent 9 in prison. I've become well acquainted with inquisitorial techniques. Let us not waste time, Commander, yours or mine. Quite simply, I'm not prepared to discuss a very emotional and deeply personal matter with a junior member of the British Intelligence Service.
Then I suggest that we discuss less personal and emotional matters until you are ready to confide in me. Because like you it or like you it not, Professor, there is no one else.
You'll do. I don't know whether or not you share the feeling that life is worthless unless there is some reward for living it. But that is my feeling. I am not satisfied with a barren harvest. As you know, I am both poet and scientist, pursuits both of which carry me along unexplored paths, directing my individual creative intelligence towards some truth, some discovery of my own. What I find may be of value to society. On the other hand, of course, it may not. But that is of little consequence, because I am an individual.
Of some achievement.
Oh, yes. But we have a proverb. Neither speak well nor ill of yourself. If well, men will not believe you. If ill, they will believe a great deal more than you say.
Am I to assume that you feel that your individual achievements would receive more scope in the West?
I do feel that,
And
yes.
that is the basis of your application for political asylum?
You had a poet, Commander, one Gerard Manley Hopkins, who chose to become a Jesuit. And in doing so, he also chose to deny his individuality. Yet his great poetic discovery was that God had given everything an individual claim on life, a God-given sign on every beast, on every leaf and blade of grass. Now, there was a dilemma, Mr. Ryan, of some magnitude. I have no pretensions towards heaven, so whether I regard myself highly or not is of little consequence compared with that poor man's fear of doing so. Yes, I hope that since you make such play with your liberties, I could work in England, saying what I believe, acknowledging what I find, exploring my intelligence.
There may be a price.
There is always a price.
What would you expect to pay?
Perhaps it is the hour of the night. You come to the bargaining too soon.
Your request was an urgent one, I gathered.
Ah, but urgent is a term like beginnings. It has many relative meanings. You do not know my country well, I think.
No, no.
Nor the people either. Huh? We need to talk.
Yes, I'd gathered that.
Do the chattels reflect your taste, Commander, or the poverty of your department?
This is an office, however much I might prefer a gallery. So, how did you get here?
How?
Well, you could hardly have crossed your frontier as a tourist,
You're
could you?
asking me to expose friends.
I'm merely trying to piece together...
I cannot help you.
Professor, bureaucrats need details. Facts, places, names.
I will not betray confidence.
We would not punish the people who help.
A secret uttered, Commander, echoes on, whatever your intentions.
Well, at least you could tell me how you got out of the hospital.
Hospital?
Well, call it what you will, prison, camp, institution. You still managed to escape, didn't you?
Never, my friend. One does not escape from our mental hospitals or our labor camps except into insanity. No, I have not been in hospital or prison, not for some years.
My information is that
The government wished to divert attention from my activities.
Which have been what?
A military assignment. I've been studying our European frontier, the defense system of our so-called Iron Curtain.
Studying or developing, Professor?
Or shall we say that I've been considering the defense capabilities? I would welcome coffee.
Yes, of course. I'm sorry. It may take a little while. The kitchen staff will not be on duty.
Only the intellectuals of the West keep on social hours.
Come in. Mr. Williams, I was wondering if you'd be kind enough to see what could be done about coffee. The Professor and I look as if we're in for a long night.
Certainly, sir.
Is there something...
Major Solomon wonders if you could spare him a moment, sir. Outside, sir.
Change the interrogators, Detective Inspector, subtly, clumsily, as you will. But the commander is the man I will talk to.
That is not the purpose, Professor. Believe me. Well?
An interesting development.
Well, I hope so. Gourko's been quite awkward enough without unnecessary interruptions.
The Soviets know about the man's move.
It's hardly surprising. He is a significant figure.
Well, perhaps more than you know. According to my information, your professor is alive and well and working in Moscow.
Come in. How are you getting along with our literary giant?
I've been concentrating more on the scientists, really, sir.
Well, perhaps you should give the poet a run for his money. Maybe easier to trip him that way, if he isn't Gourko.
Yes, I'm not too familiar with the poet.
Oh, now, this is the best-known collection, The Cornet and the Beast, written about 30 years ago. I had a high regard for it when I was younger. Always difficult to know about literature and translation, of course. How good a writer would Turgenev seem to us without Constance Garnett? Have you told him about Major Sullivan's report that he's still supposed to be in Russia?
No, not yet. If he was genuine, I thought it might cramp him even more. He doesn't want to betray people.
And if he's a fake?
Thought it might put him on his guard too soon.
Yes. Well, Sam, I think I'd tell him. If he's a fake, he'll feel insecure anyway. The news might trigger some reaction. What's he given you so far?
He says that all the stories about him being in mental hospital were just deliberate cover. He's been on military attachment, developing Russian-European defense strategy.
Well, that'd certainly make sense.
And put his value high.
Now, what do you think? Is he Gourko?
I've no reason to think one way or the other, yet.
That's for you to decide, then. But if he is to be caught, my guess is this is where he'll do it. There's the usual pressing urgency. As you said yourself, our man could be extremely valuable.
I'm surprised that you do not already have my photograph.
Not a recent one, sir.
Two main lines. Gourko made a tour here in the early 50s as a poet, not as a scientist. Now, check it out. There's some possibilities here. Teachers, fellow travelers, other poets. Now, the other line's more tricky. Gourko's an authority on Russian-European defense. Now, he may or may not have been out of touch lately, we're not sure, but he certainly has a potential usefulness. So politicians, scientists, writers, anyone who knows him or had contact with him, we need a positive identification. Now, get a move on.
I hope you slept.
Until they woke me for the portrait gallery.
Do sit down.
Thank you. Your staying power proved unequal last night.
I received a piece of unexpected information.
Concerning myself?
The Soviet government claims that Andrei Gourko is not only perfectly sane, but also, in spite of past lapses which have long since been forgiven, a stalwart of the party line, and is at this moment working in Moscow.
There's a fine point in philosophy that a man needs the evidence of others to tell him who he is. I'm a hero, then.
So we're told. Or perhaps I should say we're told that Andrei Gourko is a hero. So now we shall have to find a way of identifying you in spite of your government.
I'm not unknown.
In England?
There must be people who remember me.
Names.
Yeah, more difficult. When I came here, they called me the angry Russian. At home, I'm simply Stiliaga, self-opinionated, style seeker, wanting to be myself.
They were still prepared for you to leave the country,
The
though.
cultural gesture, my poetry, did not offend them. Politically. It should have done. Some of it was meant to.
Professor, I need names. People that you knew or met.
20 years ago.
Well, scientists have visited Russia in that time. Writers, you must have met some of them.
Many, across the usual barriers. Why are they doing this?
To embarrass you?
Quite possibly. I have protested so often that we have no place for the individual. Perhaps they hope to prove me wrong by making me see how lonely it is without them. And believe me, it is very lonely, Commander.
I saw the man in Moscow University some 4 years ago. He was, what shall we say, a talker.
Would you recognize him again, sir?
The Russians have a reputation for talking, you know. Recognized. He had a good deal of iron grey hair, quite distinguished.
Would you say this was the man, sir?
Could well be, yes. I've changed myself latterly. Beyond all recognition, according to my wife. Portly, toothless. Could be him. This is a more recent photograph, sir. Come now. Oh, deliberately trying to confuse me, officer.
Shall we go back to what I asked you last night?
You're paying the piper.
If you haven't been in a hospital, where exactly have you been? And how did you get to England?
To tell you where I've been would be to give away too much of my bargaining power.
Have you any?
Oh, yes, I think so. Don't you? I've been working at a new establishment where the whole of our Western defense system is coordinated. One man at one desk is now in a position to interpret the situation from any point from the Arctic Ocean to the Mediterranean.
And where exactly is this establishment?
That is what I must keep to myself. For the moment.
Well, how did you get here?
Would that help?
Well, we could retrace your movements. We could establish a chain of contacts. Somebody would identify you.
But I have identified myself. What more do you ask? Here I stand.
Well, not according to our reports.
But you've been informed by a regime all too anxious to claim my well-being.
You must admit, Professor, nevertheless, it is an embarrassing situation.
For whom? The politicians.
They are involved.
And what of humanity? Is humanity embarrassed?
I'm afraid my concerns are not on so grand a scale.
Perhaps they should be.
I believe you arranged a lecture in the early 50s, sir, for a Russian poet, Andrei Gourko.
Yes, I did.
And you accompanied him on the tour.
I went to a couple of the shows. Please do sit down, Inspector.
Oh, thank you, sir. You've seen him since?
I have better things to do than spend my time in Russia, Mr. Williams.
Was this the man, sir?
Well, it could be, I suppose. It's rather a long time ago, you know. He did have rather a lot of hair, I do remember that much. And he was younger looking, of course.
You any idea who might know him if he has any friends here?
Look, I am an agent. There was a demand for the man, and I supplied it, and that is all there was to it. Business.
I see, sir.
I doubt if he made any friends there. Only ever listened to his own voice.
Oh, talked a lot, did he, sir?
You could put it that way. He was well protected, too. Aren't they all? Even had the KGB sleeping with him, someone said. Well, it wouldn't surprise me. Oh, excuse me. I've just finished.
So thank you for your time, anyway, sir.
You could try a few poets. The left-wingers seem to get on with him in their own fashion.
Friends, intimates.
I was protected from friendship, Mr. Ryan. We were always well protected.
I've been reading this collection. The Cornet and the Beast.
It is the misfortune of poets to be known by their least perfect works. Rupert Brooke, If I Should Die, Magdalen's sentimental bestseller.
I think patriotism had something to do with that.
I'm never too clear what patriotism is.
Which perhaps accounts for your presence here.
Huh.
Tell me about this.
Oh, the poetry is beyond your command.
The title interests me.
Now my father was a junior officer in one of the hussar regiments. At cavalry school, the junior officers were called cornets. The cadets were called beasts. You were a beast for about a month. During that time, both the instructors and the cornets treated the beasts very harshly. To sort out, as you would say, the men from the boys. To get rid of anyone with the slightest weakness of character. I use the situation as an analogy of the early years of Soviet life.
The beast being the peasant?
Oh, exactly so. The peasants were hurled into a maelstrom of a totally new, inhuman, bullying system which few could identify. Intellectual studies were beneath the contempt of the young cavalry officer, as humanity was beneath the contempt of the Soviet regime. I saw the whole contemptible Cornet tradition as symptomatic of a terror from which my country had not, even with the new Enlightenment, escaped.
Do you recall the poem itself?
No, I've lost interest in it. I'd done so even at the time of the tour. Not as a piece of thinking, but as a poem. A much better work was My October. but the audiences were not ready for it. My craft and art have both enlarged. The Cornet and the Beast by Andrei Gourko.
Oh, I remember him all right. Good voice, damn good poet, too. Couldn't stand the man, though.
You went on the tour, sir?
Yes, I was engaged to read some of the stuff. Initially, I believe, to relieve the ears of the audience. But Gourko didn't take much to my rendering. So I was reduced to sitting in a corner, twiddling my thumbs.
I can't assume a friendship, then, sir.
You can't.
Would you recognize the man again?
I certainly recognize the back of his head.
Is this him, sir?
Could be, I suppose. I remember a rather more arrogant line. The prison may have softened him a little. He has been in prison, hasn't he? Or hospital, they call it, don't they?
So I understand, sir.
I must say he's courageous. Whatever else.
Well.
It could be the Russians are unwilling to admit the loss of one of their eminent sons and perhaps are hoping to embarrass him into a hurried return.
Return?
If he can't find a home elsewhere, he may have to go back.
Which all hinges on our proving his identity.
Exactly so.
How are you progressing?
At the moment, I'm afraid, indifferently.
Seems an odd game to play.
Well, as I can't fathom exactly what kind of a game it is, I can only assume it's one the Russians are playing among themselves.
Not for the first time. The minister is very anxious to underline how welcome Gourko would be as an advisor at the new European Joint Defence Conference. He would be willing to advise, would he?
We'd make that a condition of asylum.
It's a pity one has to talk in such terms.
Such terms are the currency of this trade. There's always a price for political asylum.
I do wish I could make you understand. Unless we can establish your identity beyond question, we won't be able to consider asylum, and then you'll be handed over to the Russian authorities, who are already clamouring at the gate for you.
What more can I do?
More, Professor? You haven't done anything yet.
I've told you who I am.
Officials from your embassy are already lobbying some of our right-wing politicians.
On what grounds?
On the grounds that far from being Andrei Gourko, you are in fact a convicted criminal wanted on several serious non-political charges.
Yeah, and what name have they elected to give this convicted criminal?
Krupavik?
All right, let us cast aside all doubts. There was a girl here in London.
Name?
Margaret. Margaret Field.
Where did you meet her?
She came to one of my performances, pushed a note into my hand, which escaped the attention of my companion.
What sort of note?
One of admiration.
Of course.
I saw her several times in several places. She was a student of literature. Beautiful. In an English way.
Which way is that?
She was from the north. Their legs are short. I like that.
And her name again?
Field.
Marjorie.
Margaret.
Ah, yes. Did she tell you she was from the north?
Her voice did. The short ah sound. She said I made her laugh. That would be right, would it not?
But you made her laugh.
At any rate, that she had a North Country dialect. In fact, she came from one of the industrial centres, Manchester, I think.
What performance did you meet her at?
Oh, there were so many.
How did she pass you the note?
Well, she came to my dressing room. There was a crush. Passed a note to my hand, which I concealed immediately.
Why?
In a nervous society, one learns to be nervous.
Would you ask Major Sullivan to come in here as soon as possible, please? We must find this Miss Field.
I hadn't wanted to involve her.
Why not?
It was a fleeting thing.
You need help, Professor.
This may not help her.
Any reason for thinking that?
She may be married. Not everyone likes the past unlocked.
We will be discreet, Professor.
In your world, Commander, discretion is a quality of little consequence.
Come in. Ah, Major Sullivan. Professor Gourko has remembered a name. Margaret Field. She was a student here during his 50s tour. They had a brief, but I gather, happy relationship.
Oh, that would be underestimating Mr. Ryan. At the time, I would have married her had it been possible to take her back to my country, although she was a lot younger than me.
How old was she?
21.
So now she'd be in her early 40s.
She was a northerner. Short legs, apparently. From Manchester, somewhere.
Was that all?
No. She had digs, is that right? In an area called Chiswick.
Chiswick?
You went there?
Yeah, twice. I escaped from my hotel on 2 daunting occasions.
You remember the address in Chiswick?
No, park something. I can't remember.
There's not much to go on, is it? I'll try it on Mr. Clark.
It's all we've got.
Yes, I'll tell him that.
Ah, Major. How are the inquiries?
Oh, dead end so far, sir, except for this.
What is it?
There's the name of a girl, a student Gourko met in his poetry tour.
Well, that should help.
Well, I doubt if it'll lead anywhere. Nothing else has.
Well, let me know as soon as he's cleared. Went to the minister's anxious to set up a meeting.
If we clear him, sir.
Ever the optimist, Major.
Mr. Harris?
Yes?
Detective Inspector Williams, sir. I'd like to ask a few questions, if I may.
I'm late.
That won't take a moment, sir.
Well, what is it?
I believe you attended a poetry reading given by a Russian writer, Andrei Gourko, sometime in 19...
What?
Is it true, sir?
Didn't I pay for the program?
You made a block booking, sir.
Nobody keeps records that long.
In the name of a branch of the Young Communists. You were a young communist at the time, were you, Mr. Harris?
So what am I supposed to be doing? Corrupting the young?
It is an urgent matter, sir.
Do you mean that they had the gall to pass our names on? Is that what you're saying?
Not your name, sir. No, the booking was noted.
Well, I won't even bother to ask you how you traced me.
It wasn't difficult, sir.
What do you want?
I'm rather anxious to trace anyone who had any personal contact with the poet.
With Gourko, you mean?
Yes, sir.
Well, we all did.
All, sir?
Yes, well, see, we had this literary group, 5 of us, and he came to one of our meetings. Why?
Now, could you tell me any more, sir?
Look, what's this all about?
Oh, just a question of identity, sir. If you could just tell me about this particular meeting.
Look, do you mind? Well, 5 of us. We're all split up now, of course. But I expect you know that. Well, Tom went into insurance. Bob Goring went to Canada somewhere. Bernie, well, he was a Jew, so he was against Gourko anyway. And then there was Eric. Well, he's the only one I still see. If that isn't too incriminating.
Did any of you keep in touch with Professor Gourko at all, sir?
Oh, not that I know of. He wasn't that sort of bloke, really. As a matter of fact, I was the only one who really cared for his stuff, and that was only because I'd been to a red brick nut house where they taught me that English poetry ended with Swinburne.
I see, sir.
I wish I did.
Now, would this be Professor Gourko, sir?
God knows. Yeah, I suppose it might be, but... Well, it was 20 years ago, you know. More. By the way, what's he professor of?
I'm not sure, sir. Something to do with ballistics, I think.
Ah, well, that figures. His poetry was about as subtle as a Roman catapult. I play it to the kids sometimes, just for a laugh.
Play it, sir.
Well, what is it this time? Contravention of the copyright laws?
Oh, no, sir. I just hadn't realized there were any recordings.
Look, I told you, it was very unofficial. Came one evening, I made the recordings on some old equipment we had. Now, I don't mind talking, but I am late as usual. So if you want any more, you'd better come and see me tonight.
I don't think that'll be necessary, sir.
Well, it's up to you, Squire.
But if you could just tell me what I might get in touch with Eric.
Eric? Oh, yes, he runs the pub down the road. But he won't be any good to you, I'm afraid. He isn't red anymore.
Are you, Mr. Harris?
Tell me about this Margaret Field.
Again?
Well, did she have any interest? I mean, was she political? Did she have any clear motive for pushing herself at you?
Yes, entirely biological. I was also a poet. I appealed to her romantic, depressive nature.
Did she appeal to you? I mean, apart from having short legs and the fact that you wanted to marry her.
No, to be honest, I can't recall her face at all. Then I was never one for devotion. An assortment of whores could well have served for my collective distaff.
You have a choice way of putting things, Professor. What about your wife? Is she still in Moscow?
As far as I know.
And children?
Yes.
How many? 4, isn't it?
3.
Well, they'll be punished.
For my defection, I expect so. Deprived of benefits, rehoused. There are numerous ways in which our masters can impose their various displeasures.
And she lived in Chiswick.
You're surely not trying to catch me out in some way.
No. Just simply checking.
Checking.
This Miss Field interests me. I hope, for your sake, that we find out.
Miss Field, Commander, is the story of all our lives. The student who falls for her master. In this case, a poet here. I was that to many of them. They know nothing of me as a scientist, only as a performing voice. It was an easy role. The West gave me a feverish welcome. To be lauded as I was satisfies even the most ardent political idealist. Show me the political leader who does not live well. I had a friend of mine once. A woman, long since dead, who had known Gorky. Now, there was an indifferent writer who might have done better had the Leninist left him to his own talents. She was introduced to him, this friend of mine, on one occasion, and told, as I imagine you would be instructed on what to say to the Queen, exactly how she should approach the great man. In such a way, the politicians persuaded Gorky to propagandize them and produce rubbish unworthy of literary title. There were such persuasive forces here.
Miss Field among them?
Oh, no. Our relationship was entirely of that other kind.
Apart from the Field girl, everything else is negative.
As you'd expect, Alan, particularly if the man's a fake. They'll have done their homework, covered themselves. But you think he's genuine?
At the moment, I really don't know.
It's up to you. But we need a decision. What about the poetry?
Well, he fights a bit shy of that, particularly the Cornet volume. Seems to prefer something called My October.
What's he say about that?
Well, that audiences in the 50s weren't ready for it.
Is that exactly what he said?
Far as I remember, yes.
Well, listen to a tape of the conversation, because if he did say that, then I'd be very suspicious. If I'm right, My October was written quite a while after his 50s tour. I believe it put him in prison.
Good day, madam. I understand you have students living here.
Oh, yes, dear. I'm on the university list.
Do you keep records at all?
Records?
I'm trying to trace a Miss Field.
Oh?
Margaret Field.
I don't have girls here any longer. They take too much looking after.
This would have been some time ago.
Oh?
1950, 51.
As long as that?
She was at Bedford College.
Margaret. I can't think of her.
Probably came from the north somewhere.
A lot of them do, you know. Margaret what, did you say?
Field. Margaret Field.
Oh, Margaret! Yes, that's right, of course. Was it as long ago as that? Would you credit it? She came from Rochdale. Such a nice girl. Fancy you knowing her.
You haven't kept in touch with her, by any chance?
Oh, she used to send a Christmas card and that. 1951. 51, eh? I'd never have thought it. She'll have changed by now, I expect. Quite a girl, our Maggie.
You wouldn't know where I could find her.
I've got an address on a Christmas card. Do come in.
Thank you.
She went back home, you know, teaching or something. Were you a student yourself, dear?
We're in correspondence from time to time. At least we were up to the time of his disappearance.
That's 2 years ago, sir.
Something like that. He's a remarkable man. A Renaissance figure, really.
Whatever that means, sir.
Simply that he hasn't fallen for our ridiculous trap of specialization. He's a master of all disciplines.
Would you recognize him from this, Dr. Blom?
I never actually met him. There was an occasion some years ago I went on a trip to Moscow. They had a somewhat guarded convention at the university. He lectured. I don't know if you're familiar with the lecture halls there, Inspector. They're formidable. I really couldn't say if that's the man or not. We were perhaps 300 or even 400 feet apart.
Okay, thank you. Inspector Williams is on his way up. Manchester Special Branch located the field girl's parents, or anyway, the mother. Father died some time ago.
And the girl?
Dead. Car crash 6 months ago. There were some doubts raised at the inquest.
Doubts?
Well, mostly technical, concerning the state of the vehicle.
What was wrong with it?
A suggestion that it had been tampered with. But on the evidence, the coroner didn't seem to think so.
This thing is beginning to smell.
Well, hasn't it always?
Your leads have produced nothing. The girl is conveniently dead. Our professor is far too confident. Certainly too convincing, except that he seems unsure about the date of the poem. The minister is pressing Mr. Carson for a decision, and Mr. Carson reassuringly says it's up to me.
If the minister's made his mind up, he's made his mind up. That can only be because he's under pressure, so why are we even bothering?
Whoever's made his mind up, and for whatever reason, is irrelevant. It's my job to find out who that is in my office.
If you think he isn't Gourko, then who is he?
Yes, and more important, what's he here for?
Well, that's simple enough. Gourko would be welcome because of what NATO brass thinks he might be able to tell him. And once he made any kind of contact with NATO, he'd be in direct line with his establishment. Plans...
Personnel? The current mood vis-à-vis America?
In a nutshell.
Yes, I suppose that must be it.
What's the confusion?
What about the poem?
Yeah.
Well, he mentioned something apparently written in the 60s as if it had been included in his 50s tour.
What does Mr. Carson say?
He thinks it's probably enough to hang the man.
Well, is it?
I'm not convinced. Not yet.
Inspector?
Well, it may be some use, sir. I'm not sure. I caught up with a Michael Harris, school teacher, one-time young communist.
And?
It seems that Harris was part of a literary circle at the time of Gourko's poetry tour. He paid them a visit.
So this Mr. Harris and the professor have met?
Yes, sir. Harris recorded the session.
Is the recording still in existence?
Well, I gather he plays it from time to time, sir, to some of his pupils.
Ask him if we can borrow it. Tell him it's evidence in an important case. Go on, grab it.
Right, sir.
You'll get a voice print off that.
Not that that would prove anything.
I wondered how long I'd have to wait for promotion.
Believe me, Professor, it's through no fault of mine that we haven't met earlier. I'm delighted that the opportunity's now occurred. Do please sit down.
Do I take it my application has been successful?
Ah, not yet. We haven't quite reached that stage. A matter of time. Can I offer you a drink?
No.
Formalities are slow-moving the world over, I imagine. Whitehall's no worse than most.
I am anxious to resume work and put a long-held theory to some test.
Theory?
Or will I be able to write in England about English things, or will I forever look back to the past and become another sentimentalist like the traditional Slav?
I suppose that depends on what you choose to write about.
If I stay here.
If, as you say, you stay here. I gather from my colleague that your own favourite work's My October.
I prefer it to the Cornet.
It's more recent, of course.
That has a certain maturity, but I forget exactly.
Your output's been considerable.
It has, and time has a habit of turning back upon itself.
I always understood My October was the cause of your embarrassment in the early 60s.
Nothing in my work has ever embarrassed me, Mr. Carson.
Perhaps we're using the word differently.
Quite possibly.
We were discussing what happens if you are granted asylum.
On that particular count, I must make a condition.
Conditions more usually emanate from the side offering the hospitality.
On this occasion, there will be an exception.
Yes?
I am not interested in bargaining. I will not be used as a political pawn in anyone's game. And I want no demands of a political nature made on my time. I have certain information which your NATO allies may find valuable, but I am reluctant to betray friends and will not give away the secrets of my country. And I have no intention of taking part in any undermining of the Soviet ideal. The purpose of my exile is not that I should establish an influence in the chancelleries of Europe, but that I should make certain of a place in the literary history books.
I have to tell you, Professor, that our NATO allies and their governments can bring pressure.
On me?
On us.
The British?
They may oblige us to do what we have no wish to do. And that is to hand you over to the authorities at your embassy.
Well, that is a risk I have to take.
The fact that you've expressed so strongly a determination to keep out of politics could be evidence of your integrity. Come to that, your identity too. But I don't make final decisions. At least not as final as this one has to be.
Go on, Mr.
The value of your potential contribution to Western literature may not be enough to offset the undoubted political embarrassment.
Embarrassment. I will not betray my country. For America, for NATO, for the British. Not even for you, Mr. Carson, nor your Commander Ryan. You use the word embarrassment as if it had some gravity. I am overcome with fear, Mr. Carson. That is a word.
Give yourself a little time to think. Take Professor Gourko back to his room, will you? And ask Commander Ryan to spare me a moment.
The Cornet and the beast. 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 The Cornet and the beast.
Have you a decision, Alan?
I believe so, sir. But there's something I'd like you to hear first.
Can it wait? I have a session at the Foreign Office.
I think it's what we've been looking for.
I trust so. The Soviet government's been lumbering heavier guns along today.
There are two prints, actually, sir, from two sources. An older tape taken from that machine, and a more recent tape from the commander's equipment, which I've already recorded on the spectrograph.
But the voice is saying the same thing.
Oh, yes, yes, sir. I'll play this one. Oh, the machine automatically makes a loop to ease the operation.
The Cornet and the Beast. The Cornet and the Beast. The Cornet and the Beast. The Cornet and the Beast.
You'll notice, sir, that there are differences in the configuration between the two recordings, where there's a heavier concentration of acoustic energy, particularly here.
But these are quite different recordings.
Oh, yes, yes, sir. In fact, I understand the tape taken from that machine is 20 years old or more.
Do we have two different voices?
Bearing in mind the disparity between the two prints, I would say yes.
So it's a bit like a vocal fingerprint?
Ah, no, sir. No, it cannot provide conclusive proof. You see, it's quite possible for a good mimic to reproduce the same print as his subject.
But these are quite different prints.
Oh, yes, yes, sir, quite different.
From two different voices?
Well, on balance, yes. But if you're asking me to give a definitive yes or no, I can't give it.
Your man's not a mimic, is he?
I don't suppose it ever occurred to him he'd need to be.
And what about aging of the voice, sir? Doesn't that change things?
Oh, yes, yes, of course. But one would still expect to see certain common characteristics between the two prints, even though this one is 20 years old.
Well, that's it then, isn't it? Thank you very much indeed, Commander.
Come in. Come in, Professor. Sit down. Major Sullivan and I have been discussing your views on individuality.
Individuality?
Your analysis was most impressive.
Yet his great great poetic discovery was that God had given everything an individual claim on life, a God-given sign on every beast, on every leaf and blade of grass.
Incriminating things, these God-given signs?
An odd word, Major, incriminating. They're simply signs, marks, distinguishing characteristics.
Like fingerprints?
The fingerprint is a simple example, yes.
In your view, a more significant example would be what? The poet's eye?
Well, certainly.
The poet's ear?
Poet's voice, Professor?
Are you familiar with voice, Prince? When Andrei Gourko was in England 20 years ago, a recording was made, probably without his knowledge, of his own rendering.
20 years ago?
We've traced that recording and compared it with this tape of your voice.
Look, voices change over such a
We're
period.
told they retain some similarity. In your case, Professor, there isn't any.
It's a crude method, Major. We all know that. Inconclusive, unreliable, totally.
Given the disparity between the two prints, we believe that your voice and Andrei Gourko's are not one and the same.
If we were to accept the suggestion of yours as incontrovertible, which I do not, how can you prove that the recording you say you've got is that of Andrei Gourko?
I don't think we need to.
You did make one other slip. In your appraisal of My October, you got the date wrong.
Date?
My October was written long after your tour here, so it's hardly surprising that audiences here in England failed to appreciate it, as you claim, since the poem wasn't written then.
But an output as considerable as mine, that is quite possible.
Once there's a crack in a wall, Professor, it'll widen, go on widening. You're not Andrei Gourko any more than I am.
So now we can start, can't we? It nearly worked. But for those two factors, you might have infiltrated NATO defense personnel.
As it is, you can relax. No more tension, no more anxiety or suspicion.
No more fear of failing.
Because you've already failed.
So after all the pleasantries of the last few days, we can really begin, can't we, Professor? Who are you? What are you? Where are you from? What are your plans, your contacts, your instructions, everything? In your own time, of course.